Welcome to The Crucible, Conversations for the Curious. I am Hamish, your host. This podcast is for anyone going through awakenings, trying to make sense of life, whether dark nights of the soul, needing to make life-changing decisions, struggling with addiction or critical illness, or simply realizing that their life as they know it is not aligned to values and purpose. You are not alone. You can get through this, I promise you. Life is far more beautiful on the other side. Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of The Crucible, Conversations for the Curious. We've got Marc with us today. Marc's got a fabulous story. Marc's been one of these people who's travelled around the world, going to exotic places, working in exotic places, but it took a toll. Marc, thank you so much for turning up today.
Thanks, Hamish. Thanks for the introduction too. It's great to be here.
Lovely. Can you tell me a bit about your story and your lifestyle that everyone really sort of aspires to and would love to do what you've done?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Initially, I was thinking about maybe sort of sharing where I'm at now and then reverse engineering my story, because it would sort of be quite interesting to do it that way, but I'll hold off for now. So I'm 40 years old. When I first left the country, as in the UK, and headed towards tropical destinations, which then became, a huge part of my life, I was 19 years old. Part of that generation, I guess, that went off backpacking sort of post sixth form college, and then before they went to university. I went off with three mates and traveled the world as a backpacker, and it completely opened my eyes. When I returned, I went off to university in Plymouth to study sports science, with the idea, I think, to become a PE teacher back in those days. But my family were all teachers, and it was kind of the way that I was going to go. However, after backpacking, I went with, let's say I was quite not resistant, but I wasn't really all into it. My eyes had been opened so much that I just wanted to get back out and travel the world. So as soon as I finished, again, as most students or students are just coming out of uni, have no pennies at all. Anything you do is normally put into an evening out on the tiles or whatever it is. There's definitely no savings. So I had to think outside the box about how I was going to get out and see the world. So coming from Hampshire and Southampton being nearby, I had all these great big cruise liner headquarters there. So I applied for a job to go off on the Queen Mary 2 with Cunard, which I got as a cocktail bartender. And I actually, funnily enough, I thought I'd just walk up the gangway there in Southampton and off we'd go, because it was transatlantic, the QM2. But actually, they flew me to New York to board it. And I didn't realize at the time when I was walking up that gangway at Brooklyn Harbour that this was going to be the start of, almost a 15, 16-year expatriate lifestyle that I was embarking on. And then I did the cruise ship for a year. And then I did a couple of ski seasons working in luxury ski chalets and doing Mediterranean sort of work in the summertime. And then Thailand was a big pull to me from my backpacking days. That was a country that really stood out to me. I just had a fabulous time there. Absolutely fell in love with the country. And it was a big dream of mine. In fact, I had said to my backpacking pals when we left, moving on to I think Singapore and Australia, I said, I'm going to come back and work here one day. I didn't realize that at the time, but that's probably one of the strongest law of attraction statements I've ever made. So much so that, fast forward, I think 14 years later, my son was actually born on the island that I said that comment on. It's strange, isn't it? The things that you put out into the cosmos. Anyway, I took a one-way ticket to Thailand, took a big gamble, big risk as a 24-year-old, a little bit of savings in the bank, but not a lot, probably enough to give me about 6 weeks to see if I could make a life. And I landed a job at a yacht marina managing an upmarket restaurant, let's say. And I was picked up by one of the bigger resorts that saw talent in me, I guess, about 6 months later. And then this kind of really awesome career started in luxury hospitality. And that took me right through until I left as a father with two children. My son was born in, as I said, in Thailand. My daughter's born in Bali. So that was my career, if you like. But there's a lot more to it in terms of what I was actually getting up to and what was the real pull for me to get back out and see the world? What was I really fishing for?
Fabulous. Well, tell us more, because I mean that just sounds so glamorous. I can start that bit again. That is fabulous. Tell us more about it, because that lifestyle, going out, getting a job on the yachts, that's so sexy. I went to Thailand in 1992, so I'm showing my age a bit. And it was remarkable country. So I can really understand why you wanted to go back there. Yeah. So tell us a bit more about the guts of it.
So I think it's quite, when I try to sort of like digest all of this, when I look back at your life, as you do sometimes, especially as you mature and you start to sort of understand maybe what your core values are and what you're actually trying to achieve in younger days, and how that kind of materializes. And one of the biggest core values I've got, I guess, or one of the strongest, is freedom. So much so that it sounds a bit silly saying this, but I've actually got it tattooed on my chest. I've got Spirit of Freedom, which again is a tattoo that I had done. I think I was 25. It's just literally a few months after I was dating my now wife, and we were a bit tipsy one day and ended up in a tattoo chair. And she had the name of the beach done that we were staying on, and I had that Spirit of Freedom. So it was quite a sort of sporadic, intuitive thing that I did. But actually, fast forward to where I am now, I look at that, and that Spirit of Freedom means so many different things to me now. But at the time, what it meant was that sense of, flying the wings, seeing the great big world, kind of doing what I wanted to do, if that makes sense. Not having to answer to anybody, just following my intuition, following the pull of whatever made me happy. Right. I was very much. I still am to some degree, but I think with responsibility and maturity, things get a bit harder to be so living in the moment, in the present moment. But certainly back in the day, I was living week to week, month to month. I wasn't looking anywhere as far as that. I just wanted to be living in an environment which made me happy, such as the tropics. I wanted a social life which was vibrant and exciting. The more I changed and adapted and grew from being in those types of environments, starting, as I said, as a backpacker, just gave me a much more rounded perspective of the world, the planet that we live on, the different cultures. So as I arrived to, Thailand, for example, when I first started on the ships, I had all of that. But then there was that excitement of being young, of the party side of it. And, as I said, I was just a socialite. I just wanted to have fun and meet people. And of course, what came with that was the not so healthy side of things, let's say. So I drank heavily, mainly because of the party scene, not because I ever felt like I needed a drink, but it was just part of the culture that I was in, if you like. Attending beach clubs on a regular basis, or going to pool villa parties, all of the stuff that you can imagine an expat living in the tropics to get up to. I smoked, which to this day, so many people that meet me now are surprised by, because by profession I'm a solopreneur. I help men transform their lives from a health perspective. It's quite hard for people to swallow when they sort of see that Marc now as a 40-year-old kind of healthaholic, if you understand, to understand that I had that transformation. But yeah, that was a big pull. That was what I was after back in those days. I was after excitement. I was after partying. I was after meeting people. I was after being able to tell stories. And it was an amazing sort of life while it lasted.
Yeah, I can well imagine. Yes, I lived in Cape Town for a long while, and there is that kind of lifestyle when you sort of, you kind of belong, but you kind of don't you? You're sort of sitting there, and it's not that you are not a part of that society, but you feel slightly dispossessed. And also, as you said, very much it is party, it is fun, it is hard work and play hard. It's a real combination. So you've alluded to the playing hard and the working hard bit. What else were you doing? So you were running the bars, you were helping with the ships. What else were you doing there?
So before I went to Asia, when I was working on the cruise ship and then doing the ski seasons, as I said, the ski seasons, for example, I was managing a luxury chalet, but for a very high end company, quite a private company in terms of the manifest of clientele that would come and stay. The same sort of clients that would then go on and charter a super yacht in the summer, just to give you perspective. So I was managing that, so I had a team. You had a chef, a chauffeur, housekeeper, and we were a cluster of chalets within that kind of portfolio. So talking about a team of maybe 50 people, if you're looking at the whole cluster. So of course that doing a ski season. We were young in our 20s. There was that side to it where you were working hard and actually, having a really good career to a certain degree, and really interesting career. But then there was the other side to it, which was that you're always in that kind of holiday environment, that ski season environment, that après ski environment. And I remember I would quite often, 5 times out of the 7 days in the week, I reckon, be in a bar until 3 a.m, and I'd be up at 6 a.m before the clients of the villa, or the chalet rather, had got up to serve them breakfast, to help the chef get the croissants in the oven and get all of the juices out on the table and set everything, So, I'm looking back at it now, I just don't know how I did it. I was literally surviving on fumes half the time, but that was kind of what I was doing there. And then when I went out to Asia, things started to get a little bit more serious. Like I said, I was working for a luxury resort company, very well known, and they've done incredibly well as a company since I worked for them in terms of their portfolio. They're international now. But when I worked there, it was a similar story, really. I was managing really, really sort of flagship restaurants. So I had this kind of front of house figure to put on and personality to put on show. And then as soon as I was out of uniform, I was riding a motorcycle straight into the neon lights of the party town on the island. I was living in Phuket at the time, and just having the most outrageous fun and lifestyle. It was really, really, I wouldn't change it for the world, Hamish. Honestly, I wouldn't. I look back at it now and just think, wow, I was making some very unhealthy decisions, but it was all part of what shaped me. I met some of the best friends I've ever come across in terms of characters. When I was out there, I met my French wife in Phuket. She was working in the resorts as well. So like I said, so many good things come of it, but there was definitely moments in there which were quite dark. I got myself into some really hairy situations, just because of being kind of a little bit, intoxicated, let's say. And a country like Thailand can be quite dangerous if you make yourself vulnerable in those types of situations. You can get yourselves into some real tricky situations. I mean, I'll give you one example. I was, I guess, in inverted commas, arrested and taken to a police station one night for being slightly over the limit. I was pulled over. It was when I was managing the restaurant at the yacht marina, and there was some international crew that were in there that worked on the super yacht, and they insisted that they wanted me to do a shot with them as I closed the restaurant. And I had a drive to do afterwards back to where I was living, and I knew, it would potentially put me over, but I was young and silly and I did the shot. I hadn't been drinking otherwise, but it was enough to put me over. I got pulled over at a checkpoint anyway, which was quite unusual at the time, and I ended up doing a night in a police cell, and which then snowballed into this really messy situation where I ended up basically almost in immigration jail, about to be deported, because I had to go to court. And the company that I was working for at the yacht marina managed to, again, sort of basically bribe to get me out of the situation because they had connections within the immigration. So, but that was a really scary moment. I was actually spent one night in a cell, and I spent a full sort of almost like a full day and evening in a holding cell with other Thai prisoners, and that were waiting to go into a court hearing. And I didn't know whether I was about to be deported. My whole life and dream that I'd set up to get to Thailand was about to be taken from me in a moment, But I've got loads of stories like that, or similar like that, just because I was being a bit silly half the time, and not really putting enough thought into the dangers maybe of some of my decision making.
Yeah, I hear you. I want to push forwards a little bit, because I know that exercise and working out and being physical has always been really important to you. Can you talk me through about that? Because I know that also got slightly out of balance as well, didn't it?
All through those years that we've just been discussing, my 20s or even late teens, 20s, through to my early 30s, I exercised vigorously. It started because, as I said, I used to do sports. I did sports science at uni, right? And I was going to be a PE teacher, as I mentioned. So sport and kind of fitness, I guess, had always been a part of me since I was a teenager. Growing up, I was sports captain at school. That was a big part of my sort of makeup, if you like, growing up. And then when I got to uni, I think like a lot of students do in that first year, they go out and they're eating kebabs at night time, putting away loads of pints of and sugary cocktails and shots in the student bar and whatnot, and they go home at Christmas and they suddenly go, hang on a sec, what's, you know, their family and all of their home mates are saying you've put on a few kilos here. And I kind of went through that process, and that was the first time I'd ever sort of thought like that. And I was like, okay, I need to run this off, and this is how it started. So when I went back to uni, I had access to a gym, and I hit the treadmill as most people do, in which I can get onto later if you like. But this is, for me, this is one of the biggest misconceptions, is like using exercise as a tool for weight loss. But that's a different story. But that was my approach at the time, which was to jump on a treadmill and just run off all this weight that I'd gained. And what I didn't realize I was doing, but I was basically giving birth to what ended up being a really quite chore-like addiction to exercise, and a really cruel mindset as well, like or not mindset, but just a real cruel belief is what I mean, belief system that I had about that I must run 3 or 4 times a week, for example, vigorously, like 10k or 12k, like huffing and puffing type running, just to be able to control my aesthetics. And that's what it was all about. If I'm being totally transparent and raw, which I'm very happy to do as a mature man, maybe not back in the day, is that's what it was all about. It was all about looking good at t-shirts, you know, being able to show off a muscular body, 6-pack or whatever it was. That's what I was interested in the most. You know, it certainly wasn't about health. You know, why would I be going and smashing a load of pints and smoking Marlboro Lights on the side, right? If that's if I was worried so much about health. So that was kind of my journey. Then I went into let's say early 20s, started to lift weights as well, and I was really, like anybody that goes through that process for the first time, it's like, oh look, I can actually start to put on some, you know, biceps, and my chest is growing, my legs are growing, or whatever. So that also became a, not really an addiction, but something that I was driven by. And then fast forward, keep going, it just, everything started to become more and more heavy, I guess, in terms of the burden that I put myself into, to the point where I was probably at my worst when it came to exercise, in terms of how much I was doing, when I was probably in my early 30s, believe it or not. And I was, you know, got to a point where I was using the gym 5 or 6 times without fail a week. I was doing heavy lifting sessions. I was doing like running every other day. If I missed my every other day run, I would give myself a hard time mentally. And not just a hard time, like, oh, you've had a shocker, or you're lazy. I would literally be like, oh, you know, almost like sort of like pinching around the waist. You know, this is like as if out of fear of gaining fat. You know, it's a really not a pleasant place that I was in. And I didn't really realize how bad it was. It's interesting speaking to my wife now, and speaking to maybe, not so much friends, but maybe some family members who really saw me, like, you know, for example, going away on a holiday, or going away for a time where you're supposed to be switching off and spending time with loved ones. But I was more concerned about getting my hour in the gym, otherwise I'd be in a grumpy mood all day, you know, or snappy, or, you know, barking at people that you don't want to bark at. You know, not that you ever want to bark at anybody, but it was when I look back at it, it was a really it was an addictive headspace that I was in, and it was fueled, as I said, by this kind of like weird conversations that you have in your head about how you want to come across to the world. Does that answer your question? Does that give you?
It very much does, and it's scary, because I'm very curious. When were you more angry and agitated and unkind to family? Was it when you hadn't done that exercise, or after you'd been to the gym? So basically pre-satiation, or post that workout. When did your mood really shift?
Yeah, that's a really great question, because the answer is that there's so many nuances to it. So I'll try and give you a couple of examples. So let's say, for example, let's say it was a random midweek night, okay? And in my head, I'd already programmed a gym session in the morning. Now, if me and my wife had gone out for dinner in the evening, and we were supposed to be, you know, it was supposed to be a dinner, you know, like a candlelit dinner, and then we'd be home by a certain time and pretty chilled out and whatnot. That was what I would have in my head, as just as an example, right? Now, life happens. Let's say my wife was in a really good mood. She was in an excitable mood, and we were having a really good dinner, and the ambience was going. Let's say it was in a Mexican restaurant. So the flavor started picking up, and the music picked up, and oh, come on, let's have another cocktail, or that type of situation. Because in my head, I would have been I wanted to do that gym session in the morning, I would have started getting grumpy in that situation, right? Because I'd have been like, oh, you're going to push me to the fact that I'm not going to end up going to the gym in the morning. I know that's going to really pee me off, and it's going to roll on into the next few days. That's how significant it was. I mean, that's when I even say, I never said that to my wife, by the way. This is something that I live with inside my own head. But this is like that was like a real situation about how it affected me just enjoying life, if that makes sense. Just like living in the present moment and enjoying life. And then there's other moments where we could have been on a, it could be on whatever it is, on a certain day out, or just doing some kind of like life chore or admin, supermarket or something. And again, I had programmed in a gym session later on in the day. Something else had happened, or she wanted to change the plan, or work had made me change the plan. It's always my wife, by the way. I'm throwing under the bus. But let's say it was a work something that had changed the plan, and I'd get frustrated in that situation too. Where just to show you the complete other side of the spectrum, which is where I am today, I have all of that thought process and feelings, emotional attachment I had to it, or long gone. They've been gone for years, because I've had a massive shift in the way, a massive paradigm shift in the way that I approach things, and I don't sort of train in any fixed day patterns anymore. So even that alone just takes all of that away. And I go with the flow, and I also listen to my body. So when I say go with the flow, I appreciate life a lot more these days. Life's for living, right? And what's the whole point of exercise and trying to keep ourselves fit and well is, one, to promote, health span and longevity, right? So we get more time to have fun. And the other moment is to actually be, to have that real vitality and that, I guess, that prowess in your own skin, that kind of natural confidence that we all deserve to have, is why I like to think of exercise now, right? So it's not about, am I going to miss my set of bicep curls? How silly that sounds these days, So if the similar situation happened now, I would just let it go and just enjoy the moment and just go, no worries, I'll pick it up tomorrow. Or like I said, I don't even just do some kind of little burst of exercise later in the day when I get an opportunity, not necessarily an exercise gear, just something to keep the body ticking over. So there's the whole spectrum has changed completely. But I was in a very, very, as I said earlier, I think the word cruel is the right word to use, because it was self-inflicted, but I just didn't realize quite how bad it was at the time.
Yeah, scary, isn't it? How did you realize? How did you realize that you were, as you said, you're being cruel to yourself? Because that's brutal.
Yeah, I think there's a couple of big aha moments that happened to me. I think I'll start with probably the heaviest one, which was sickness. Okay, so I'd always sort of like been proud of being supposedly fit and healthy. As we know, I was more fit than healthy. But I'd always been proud that people had sort of put that tag on me, when I was in my 20s. Oh, Mark's always looks fit, right? But then what I had obviously found out moving towards into the latter part of my 20s and early 30s is that clearly I wasn't healthy. That was showing up in different ways at the time. I'll probably say the most significant way was my physical energy was appalling outside of the gym. So I was pushing myself so hard on the treadmill, on runs, and also the weights that I was lifting, that I was just depleted the whole time. I was completely depleted. So that, from a physical point of view, I'm talking about like feeling like much older than I should have done when I wake up in the morning, stiff and creaky because of the amount of exercise that I was doing. So I was walking around, like a cowboy sometimes, when I should be like mobile and fluid and just enjoying life. I'd sometimes sort of like look at a staircase and think, not sure if I fancy this, which is really odd when you think that I was making all this effort to be fit and well, right? So those kind of thoughts started coming into play, like, surely I shouldn't be feeling like this all the time. Other things came into play that are quite famous for people that lift weights, or these kind of symptoms, like such as noticing moods. Like I've always sort of considered myself to be quite stable when it comes, and consistent when it comes to moods, but I noticed and I picked up on that moods could sometimes be quite low after heavy lifting, for example, or short-tempered, as I said. And this is not just to do, I mean, obviously you could link this to hangovers and things as well, but I would I felt that. I really felt that kind of drain that had come from lifting heavy metal, if that makes sense, or too much metal for your nervous system. But where it really showed up was when I was a kid, right through basically up until I've had this transformation in mid-30s. I always suffered from bronchitis in the winter time, but once I went to the tropics, it kind of subsided a little bit. It would come out now and again. Maybe if I'd had, like, again, too many party nights in a row, smoking and things like that, it might come on. But this one time, I got the really nasty chest infections, and I had to take some antibiotics. Didn't go. Had to take a second course of antibiotics. Didn't go, and it started to get really, really, like, quite worrying. It was a really, really rough chest infection I had. And one important part of this story is that during that whole period, now let's say a good 2.5 weeks of struggling with this infection, I continued to train. And not only was I training, but I was doing, at this time, I went through this period of what I thought I'd found this amazing golden ticket, which most people know as HIIT training, high intensity interval training, which again I would happily explain the dangers when it's mismanaged. And I was continued to do these HIIT training sessions while I had this really bad chest infection, bronchitis, right? And my thought process at the time was, okay, you're sweating out the toxins, and you're sort of like giving your body a run over to sort of like strengthen it, which of course absolute nonsense. It couldn't be further from the truth. What I'm doing is suppressing my immune system, so it's got absolutely nothing to do to fight back to the infection. What happened is that then turned into pneumonia, and this was a real wake-up call for me. And because like I said, even though I knew I wasn't necessarily healthy because of the drinking and the partying and the smoking and things like that, by this point I'd given up smoking, by the way. I was probably about 33 at the time. And I was just like, okay, I don't get pneumonia. That kind of thought, where you think you're immortal, and as you get a little bit older, that starts to, every year it gets a little bit softer and softer and weaker in terms of that thought process of being invincible. And I just had that moment. I was just like, so something's not going right here. You do all of this training, you do all of this physical fitness, but you can't even shake off a cough, and it's now turned into pneumonia. What's going on? So that encouraged me to delve deeper, which I certainly did. So just for your listeners, the transition that I went through after that, I left Asia. We left Asia as a family in 2019 for a number of reasons. By the way, it was not because we suddenly had decided that we'd had enough of Asia. It was mainly because of the children. So after our son was born, my wife had before my daughter's born, my wife stopped working, and we weren't actually married out in Asia just because we hadn't got around to it. It was complicated to organize a big wedding for our European family, right, to come to Asia. So when we arrived in 2019 back to France initially, we weren't married, and then Brexit happened and COVID happens. There was kind of an admin headache there. But prior to us leaving, the admin headache was the fact that I couldn't actually sponsor my wife through my work, if that makes sense, because we weren't married in terms of visas. So we were surviving. We were getting around it, but it meant really inconvenient travel from time to time, and for my wife, and it all kind of added up to the point where we were just like, okay, let's just go back and be a bit closer to family. It was a really big call. It was tough because we didn't really deep down want to leave, but we did. And when I got back, I used the moment as a platform for deep introspection. At the time I was 35. I'd had this quite glamorous, as I said, luxury hospitality career. In post 30, I had gone more into high performance rather than front house hospitality. I was working with sales teams, and I was lucky enough to be subsidized to lots of high performance kind of coaching badges. So that had opened up lots of doors and kind of visions for the future. It lit me up, basically. Anything to do with self-development and improving yourself, and also high performance, cognitive function, all these things lit me up. It's really what made me excited. So that was there. That had been simmering away anyway. But when I got back, I sort of went back to the drawing board and said, okay, I could go and just try and find a job, back in a similar industry, or I could use this as a moment to really dig deep and find out what I want to do and what my purpose is, and how I'm going to serve, as I said earlier, humanity, which sounds really deep. But at the end of the day, if we can plug into that, then I believe life sort of starts to fall into place. And that's what I did. And I didn't realize at the time and what I was going to do exactly. And I was kind of almost like asking the cosmos for answers, like through meditation and symbols and everything. I was really sort of really going for it in terms of like, give me that kind of moment, give me that epiphany moment, if that makes sense. And it kind of went on for a few months actually. And it came to me one day like a spark, like a lightning bolt, and it was linked to fitness initially. Okay, it's been under your nose the entire time. All of this journey that you've been on, all of the struggles that you've been on, all the lessons that you've learned, all of those hours that you've sweated and slaved away in the gym, have all meant for something, because it's all part of your story and all part of your learning on almost kind of what shouldn't do, how not to do things in a way. So you can now go on and self-study and find ways that are actually much more holistic, much more healthy, and then go on, not only for yourself, not only for me, of course, but then go on to help others basically not go the long route like I did and just cut straight to the prize, as it were. So that's what I did, and that's when I started to retrain and go and get certified in what I needed to, which was, I did some substantial re-education. Basically, I reinvented myself, and that's all part of a 5-year journey. That was when I was around 35, and like I said, now I'm 40 now, so big transformations. But that story about the pneumonia was the real big moment that made me sort of like click into gear with all of that. There's other stuff I could talk about in terms of how I ate and how I exercise specifically, but that was the real sort of big moment.
It's scary, isn't it, when you get an awakening like that and you don't join the dots. I mean, I remember certain things and not joining those dots, and yet, why are you going to the gym when you're sick, when you're coughing up your guts? But we don't link those things up. We don't realize that it's kind of bonkers. Yeah.
I know. Isn't that the truth? It's just, I think sometimes we just sort of go into the zone, or we can convince ourselves, or, just in, like I said, I looking back, I still don't know how I thought I was so invincible. When I look back at how I lived through my 20s, I think we all have this kind of ability in our youth, don't we? We have a sort of extra battery pack, don't we? when we're in our early 20s, and then maybe moving forward. But I mean, naturally you start to slow down. But honestly, I just look back and just think, why did I think I was being fit and healthy, and this was never going to catch up with me? Right?
Yeah. No, good for you. So when were you still drinking when you had the pneumonia? Were you still smoking then, or had you stopped?
Smoking had stopped. So I'd stopped. Smoking was something that was always going to stop. This is something that I talk about with clients a lot, actually, of mine. And it's that kind of understanding that process of change. And part of that process, or probably one of the most significant processes, is awareness, right? So I'm not sure if you've heard of the transtheoretical model of change, right? Where there's sort of a pre-contemplation stage, and then there's a contemplation stage, and you move on through the kind of like stages of this change, as it were. Then you actually try action, and so on and so forth. And I think somebody that's totally oblivious is not going to change anytime soon to whatever that particular unhealthy habit is, right? Then there's people that just don't want to hear, they're not interested, or they try to kind of cover it up. Like, my granddad was a smoker and he lived till he was 90. Those types of comments, right, are still in that very early stages. They're not going to be changing anytime soon. But as soon as somebody starts to have awareness and starts to maybe research how to quit, or what it's like to quit, or whatever it is, in my opinion, this is obviously very subjective, but once you start having that thought process, doesn't matter whether it's going to take a month or 6 years or 10 years. In theory, you should change, because you've already taken that step down that up that ladder, if you say, towards change, just by having the awareness. So I had that awareness all the way through my 20s, is the point I'm trying to make when it comes to smoking. Because I think, hitting the treadmill so often, I was sometimes might have felt tight lungs. I knew that, deep down, everybody knows who smokes that it's not healthy, however much you try to cover it up. So I had the awareness, and I tried a few times in my mid-20s and failed miserably. And, the environment was always tricky when you're putting yourself, if you're trying to quit something like smoking, you keep on putting yourself in party environments, it's going to be hard, both in terms of a visual perspective, but also if you're starting to drink and whatnot, obviously decision-making is going to be a lot looser. So anyway, I gave up when I was 30. I want to say 30, maybe 29. And the drinking continued, although it sort of organically became less and less. And I guess a lot of people can relate to this, not so many, just because of recovery time, work, and what used to be kind of a drink until 3 or maybe even 5 a.m. in Thailand was quite usual. Bali would then become, I kind of adapted a bit like a football player towards the end of their career, where they're not the fast person anymore, so they kind of adjust their game a bit to sort of daytime drinking rather than nighttime drinking. So there's all those kind of tactics were in play without realizing. But like I said, but getting towards around the time my children were born, I think when my wife was pregnant with my daughter, she was going into her, it was past 6 months. I always remember it was past 6 months. It wasn't quite the last month of the pregnancy, but it was certainly past 6 months or so. And I felt quite guilty because my wife was obviously not drinking. She was heavily pregnant by this point. And I thought, I should probably step up a little bit here and just be a bit more supportive in terms of my own behaviors. And on top of that, I think I'd already been having lots of internal dialogue about my drinking. As I can tell you a story where around that sort of time I'd finished work and I was on babysitting duty, and I was pushing a pram up towards my villa after visiting a 7-Eleven. This is about 4:00 in the afternoon, and I had gone to get myself 3 or 4 long neck bottles of beer, and that was a kind of standard at the time. That was kind of just how I wrapped up a day. I'd been at work during the day, and I typically finished sort of late afternoon. And I remember having this moment as the bottles were clinking underneath the pram, and I kind of questioned myself at the time. It's like, do I really need these beer? Is this becoming a little bit of an issue? So I was already starting to have these kind of thoughts, and that's when I decided, as I said, 6 months into the pregnancy or thereabouts, okay, I'm going to go completely teetotal, for not forever, but for a little bit. I gave myself up until the birth of my daughter, and I stuck to it pretty good. And I remember just being totally amazed by how everything changed in terms of my mood, my clarity of thinking, my skin. Even though I was lucky because I had a permanent tan. Let's be honest, I was living in Thailand, so all year round I had this kind of like natural glow that covered up probably a lot of the cracks, if that makes sense. And but I noticed that my skin was dramatically improved within a week or so of not drinking. And if you remember me saying I was working in high performance as well, so from both a coach's point of view, but also in terms of how I executed my coaching, if that makes sense, I was just different level. I just went up a gear. And that's when when you sort of go through these processes, you start to have those little kind of like moments of clarification of how much better it is to make these healthier decisions. There's no real going back, is there? It's like you sort of just get addicted to that new sense of health and positive vibes. So it all just started to escalate from there. And as I said before, by the time I'd moved back to France and from Asia, I was already well on the way to all of this completely transforming. And as I said, I went into education, which just cemented all of these new learnings and teachings. And I self-experimented a lot in terms of diet, which I'm happy to talk about as well. But yeah, that was my main sort of moment when I got up to a big change.
I think that's remarkable. This self-awareness that people seem to have of just being aware and making sense of, like, I can be a complete knob when I'm drunk or hungover, but when I have another drink for a few days, people like me and I like me. And it is nice. You feel better, as you said, you're sharper. You're able to interact with people better. You're able to do all sorts of things. And it is, yeah, 2 or 3 days without that stuff going through your system. And then I guess, like me, you realize that it was nicer feeling sober, feeling straighter, feeling sharper, being able to go to the gym when you want to or not, being able to have those conversations when you just didn't have that blur from the alcohol.
Yeah, 100%. And it's like, I can think of times, weeks would go by where I'd never escaped the cloud. And I was functioning. I was always functioning. I was doing really well in my work. You wouldn't have nobody would have noticed at work. And I'm not saying that I was getting drunk every evening either, but it was just enough to sort of like take that edge off, I guess, that I was looking for at the time. Because whether it was, pressures from work, or whether it was, like I said, whether it was trying to be sociable in a very kind of like holiday atmosphere vibe, that you go into. So all of these kind of places, the clickiness of the expatriate lifestyle on these kind of tropical islands, you're almost kind of always feeling like you need to perform. You always need to, look your best in terms of from a physical point of view, but maybe how you dress, how you turn up. It's all very, very superficial, which is sad really, because it's something that I don't necessarily like to think of myself of, but at the time that was the world that I lived in. And I'm not going to say that I never enjoyed it. As I said earlier, I never regret a lot of those years, because there was a lot of fun moments in there, of course, but definitely the flip side of that, both from being a father, from being a partner, and being a professional in what I do as well, in terms of that human element, that connection, especially in the line of work that I do now. But at the time, like I said, it was more high performance coaching. Now it's obviously more linked to health and lifestyle. It's really important that I walk the walk, but that's all happened totally naturally. Like I said, I don't have to force anything. This has all been a total natural journey. And that's the beautiful part of it, is, like it's when I had this epiphany of, okay, it's definitely linked to do with fitness, and it's linked to do with this kind of self-development, self-improvement, and maybe intuition. Maybe later in the line, maybe I'm 40 now, but maybe when I'm 50, I'll be working more in a kind of spiritual realm, in terms of helping people, like I said, discover what their actual real purpose is, or at least align to it, so they can sort of start to open those kind of doors. This isn't not necessarily going to be the finishing point, right? But at the moment, at this stage of life, I feel like I'm on my journey, and the transformation I've had, particularly in my philosophy, or the philosophy that's helped me. It's not my philosophy, the philosophy that I've learned and that's helped me make this transformation, is something that I certainly think the world needs to know about, and because it will just help so many people overcome both diet and exercise frustrations, like I said, because diet side of thing is well documented in terms of how people can get really, really get really cruel situations to do with how they approach eating. And that's not only linked to food, but also about how they look as well, of course. And then and the dangers that are involved in that whole, there's many nuances in that. But then the exercise thing is a kind of realm that I think is not talked about enough. Exercise is, it's $1 trillion or pound industry, right? And a bit like food, in terms of, we know that food can be, the way it's marketed is not necessarily in favor of our health, let's say. I think the same can be said about a lot of the health industry. Sorry, the fitness industry is what I'm saying. But it's not always necessarily from a manipulative or dark place. It could be a lot of just misunderstood information, or people not understanding quite the dangers of it. So if I could give you a very quick example, if I may, like, let's say, this is not to demonize spin classes to anybody that's listening, by the way, like, this is nothing to do with demonizing it. It's just to understand maybe what too much could look like. So let's say, for example, you've got Barry, who's an executive type. He's got 2 children, 10 and 12. He's high flying career, and he commutes to work, and he's plate spinning, is what I'm trying to say. He's got a lot of pressure on his shoulders. Now, fair play to him, because he's motivated enough to show up to spin classes 4 times a week, and he comes out of those spin classes full of feel good hormones, right? Because that kind of runner's high that we know so well. Now, runner's high is probably, again, one of the most misunderstood things that goes on, because it kind of gives us that feeling that we've had great, we've done something great. We've really pushed ourselves, and our body's benefited from it. But it's a hormonal thing, right? It's a hormonal feeling that we're feeling going on right there, to do with dopamine, endorphins, and other bits and pieces. And also, let's not forget the collaboration of everybody else kind of like screaming and shouting when you're actually in that environment, right? But the reality is, if I can link this back to doing my HIIT training during my sickness, not quite as extreme as that, but if you imagine that Barry has got filling all of these kitchen sinks of water, and he's forgetting to turn the tap off, basically, right? So going into a spin class 4 times a week for 45-minute hour, really intensive exercise is just dumping a load more stress onto a very, very stressed body and mind already. So again, like I said, this is not to demonize it, but what he's doing is depleting himself. He's making himself more tired. Okay, he's giving himself more issues long term, definitely. So again, this is not to demonize the exercise. There's just a better approach of doing things. So if spin is something that he really liked and it gives him that kind of social aspect, then perhaps once a week would be a much better plan. And then the other times would be focused more on kind of like low intensity body movement, such as like a brisk walk, for example, or that type of training, a casual swim, these types of things. And again, this type of education is something that just doesn't get talked about enough, maybe because of awareness, because people don't realize it. But there's when you do make these adjustments, sort of life becomes enjoyable again, and you can actually have an exercise routine that doesn't have to batter you to pieces. That actually promotes you feeling good. Actually makes sort of like revitalizes you. I always say that to people. If you go out for like a little jog, you should come back saying, "Yeah, that was great." Almost a bit like, I was joking with a client the other day who used to be a footballer, and he was like, "Oh, I get really bored of jogs. I can't face doing jogs." I said, you don't have to do jogs, right? First of all, like I said, you don't want to go into that training zone because it's only going to deplete you anyway. The sort of higher huff and puff type training I'm talking about. If you went for a gentle jog, that's going to do the opposite. It should reinvigorate you. So if you can hold a conversation when you're having a jog with a pal, or you're running with your dog or whatever, and you can have a chat with the dog or take a phone call, that's a pretty good zone to be in, because you're likely in aerobic training. Which is not going to deplete you in that way and drain your energy. It's going to revitalize you. So it's trying to, what I said to this guy anyway, about, he used to be a footballer, and I said, can you remember when you used to warm up for football? You used to do all those funny little side steps. You used to do the high knees, and it used to be pretty gentle and chilled out, right? You put no real routine to it. There was no real pressure on it, but you would feel good. You'd feel up for the game, right? By the time you've been doing that for about 20 minutes. Think of it that way. So rather than finish a 10-hour working day in the city and come home and go, blimey, I've got to go out on a October dark night, in the sideways rain and huff and puff for the next hour, just take that approach. Do something that's much lighter, but makes you feel good and reinvigorates you, right? And you're going to be much better off by adding that into your fitness arsenal rather than the other way.
That is brilliant, because you saved me asking that question. I want to wind back a little bit, because I'm very aware that going to the gym too often can be a terrible addiction. As you said, there's that vanity aspect of it. And hey, I did 200 kilograms today. I did whatever, that's the limit of my weight. So I have no idea. But there is that addiction, and there is the mirrors, and there is all this. And yeah, you do look good. But let's say someone's listening and they are tired perpetually. They're grumpy. They're not functioning. Their body, as you said, it's depleted. How can they start to understand that they're actually addicted to what they're doing? It is damaging their body and maybe their relationships and everything else, because when they are down here, as you said, you're grumpy, you're short-tempered, you're not functioning. How could I start to spot that and realize I've got a problem? And then what can I do?
Yeah, so it's really, really solid question as well. Again, with so many nuances to it. The classic, that kind of burnout feeling, is, if you can relate to burnout in, maybe for your profession, maybe for your family stresses, just being overwhelmed with the amount of responsibility you have. As soon as you start to feel like that, and that's what your exercise routine is providing, then you've already crossed that line. If you feel like you're not in the mood, but you're forcing yourself to do it anyway, or your body, that maybe not in the mood is not the right word to use, because there's a few caveats to that. For example, let's say it's like a winter's day and you're just a little bit kind of stiff, and you just need to, you could always loosen up and get into an exercise, right? So that's kind of not what I mean, but it's kind of almost like an intuitive feeling. It's like honing in onto those body, or your body signaling. So I think that's something that can be practiced and can be improved over time in terms of how well you can come in tune with your body signaling. But if you're feeling like really, really unmotivated to go into the gym, for example, but you've forced yourself because it's part of your routine, it's a fixed day pattern you're into. For example, on Thursdays you go and do a push and pull, whatever the case type thing. That's a dangerous place to be in, first of all. And that's what I would, when I coach clients, I sort of try to, it's one of the first things that we try to work through, is to try and break free from that mentality around fixed day patterns and understanding the body. Yeah, if you're low moods, and you're not feeling motivated to, if you look at a weight and you think, oh god, I really don't fancy this, then you're likely pushing yourself way too hard, and you're having symptoms of burnout and overreaching, which is the technical term in the sort of fitness. The technical fitness term is overreaching, burnout and overreaching, basically, where you're just pushing yourself way too much.
Good to know. And I guess you mentioned feeling into your body. I mean, that's another topic for another time, because that's not something you're going to learn tomorrow, is it? It takes a bit of time to notice whether it's up here not wanting to do it and you're going to do it anyway, or is your body saying, please no? So yeah.
You're right. It does take time, but I think, I mean, we all sort of understand our body a little bit, right? We know when we've got a complaint, and we know when we're feeling loose, right? So you just start by that point. But experimentation is important. It's a word that I use often whenever I'm speaking to somebody, or whether I'm actually coaching somebody, or even on my own life. It's all about experimentation and seeing what works and what doesn't work. And that's, again, you can put that against the way that we eat, or trialing different foods, food experiments, or, for example, there's so many buzzwords out there at the moment, but I've pretty much been through all of them in terms of self-experimentation. So whether, it's gluten-free, whether it's low carb, whether it's keto, whether it's, for example, intermittent fasting, or, 2-day fasting, or 16/8 over a period. I've tried, whenever these kind of topics come up, you can't really have a strong opinion, can you, until you've tried it yourself, is what I'm trying to say. So if you do try these things, then you're first of all, you'll get the experience of it. So certainly it will give you we're all bio individuals, so we all react slightly different. But that's a good process to go through when it comes to things like body movement, when it comes to stretching. For example, let's say you never stretch, right? You never do some kind of dynamic stretching, whether that's static stretching where you actually hold a stretch, sort of trying to improve flexibility, or whether you're just doing it in a bit like I talked about the football warm up, whether you're doing sort of like stretches just to be able to loosen the body. Now, if you never do stretches, and you might want to trial, experiment a week where in the first 10 minutes of the day, as you're waiting for the kettle to boil for your morning coffee, you do a few dynamic stretches. And then at the end of you might record what that looks like just on a bit of hand, pencil and a notepad, just say, yep, definitely made me feel better. And then maybe record that by the end of a week and see what that happens. And this is what I mean by experiment. It's like small changes, but if you habit stack it with something that you do anyway, i.e. switching on the kettle in the morning to make sure that you do it, you can actually start to sort of like, without realizing, over a period of a month or 2 months or 3 months, as long as every week you're trying something new, you suddenly go, wow, I've had some big shifts. I've had some really big lifestyle shifts, and it's made a really big difference. I'm not going back. So it's kind of like that process. You can't expect to change in a day, or to sort of take on new habits in a day, but you've got to start being proactive in terms of how you experiment, and sort of get out of your own way in terms of that comfort zone.
Brilliant. Yep.
Yep.
That makes so much sense, doesn't it? It's awareness, and as you said, awareness and being curious about your body and how you do things, just because you always have since when you were 20, and now as said, 39, 40. So yeah, I'm not quite as bouncy as I used to be. I'm not quite as robust. Yep.
Yeah, totally.
Yep. You wait till you're 50.
Yeah. Well, no, this is what everybody says. I'm taking, I'm almost like investing now, if that makes sense. And I think on that note, by the way, like, we should definitely say that, whenever it comes to anything to do with self-improvement, whether it's from, whether it's something you're doing in your work, your career, whether it's something from a hobby perspective, just something that you're interested in, or whether it's through anything to do with health and fitness, it's never ever too late, right? It's never ever too late. And the body is remarkable in how quickly it can change. So adapt is probably a better word to use than change. And that's proven, if we use the fitness analogy, if you do some push-ups, guess what? If you do it a few sets during your first week, when you return to it the next week, you'll be able to do 2 or 3 repetitions more. That's just the basic example of adaptation, right? And the same thing applies to if you're going to try fasting for the first time. If you're going to try anything of all of these types of like positive lifestyle changes, right? Your body will adapt quite quickly and things get easier and improve, right? So over time.
Brilliant. Mark, you've given me so much information. You've given us so much information. Thank you very much. Where can people find out more about you, what you do, why you do?
Where you can find me is my business, my coaching business. It's just me, and it's called Coach Overton. The website is www.coachoverton.com. Okay, that's my website. On my website, you'll find a free course, which you can just click through. It's on the homepage. You can just click through. It asks you for your email address, and you can just pop in there. And it's an online course that's bite-sized information. You could go through it in one sitting or take a few days to go through it. But that will give you a really good kind of summary, if you like, of the philosophy that I follow. That is unconventional in some ways, but as I said, it's getting a lot of media because of the approach that it provides, veering away from kind of over the top training, but particularly that kind of traditional way of eating that, let's say, the NHS wellness plate might give, that's based on lots of grains at the bottom of the pyramid. This is based more on kind of whole natural foods. So that's where you can find me. Also LinkedIn as well, Marc Overton. I try to do quite a lot of LinkedIn, and I'm doing some webinars now, so keep an eye out for me there. Like, if you want to connect with me, reach out, and any questions that you've got, happy to ask on there too. And that's it. That's where I am.
Brilliant. Thank you. Well, I'll put all your details in the show notes because there's an awful lot to get through there. That was fabulous. Yeah, no, thank you. And what's really refreshing is it's not, you have to do this, thou shalt do this, thou shalt do this, you can't eat this, have to eat that. How many things have I written down? Oh, God. I love that simplicity. And as you said, when it's effortless and you enjoy it. One last question. What is your superpower that you have made sense of by turning your life around?
I love it. It's such a deep question, and I love a deep question. The answer to that is, by turning my life around, I've almost without meaning to, as I think I've explained quite thoroughly, I've become aligned to my true calling, which not only serves me personally, from the person that you see in front of you right now, but deep within my soul, but it's also going to be my way of positively impacting humanity, right? In terms of how many people I can help, how many people I can reach, the ripple effects that will have on their lives, their families' lives. Being a role model to my children in terms of not sort of feeling the pressure that I should just go out and do anything to be able to provide. That they, in their young lives, they have seen daddy fully driven towards his purpose and not giving up however rough things got. Because I believe that in the future, that once the abundant side of things comes, I don't necessarily mean that from a financial point of view. I just mean it from in terms of all of the good things that will come just by me being aligned to my true calling. They will grow up in that environment, and it will push them on too.
I love that. And I think that is so important. You're choosing just to work from your heart, aren't you? And what is important to you. And that alignment, and it makes such a difference.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Marc, thank you. This has been a great conversation. I've really enjoyed it. I've learned an awful lot. I'm going to be on your website and looking up for 1 or 2 things on there. So, yeah. So thank you ever so much for being here today. Thank you for listening to this episode of The Crucible, Conversations for the Curious. If these powerful stories of transformation resonated with you, be sure to like, subscribe, and share this show with anyone who you think could do with a dose of inspiration for their own journey. I would really appreciate it if you could make any comments on your favorite podcast platform as well. That helps me reach more people. All the important links and information are in the show notes below. Thank you very much for listening, and catch up with you soon.